Why did a heaven-dispatched angel get physically blocked for 21 consecutive days from reaching a man who was on his knees praying? And why does the Bible record that blockade in a single passage that most people read straight past without ever stopping to ask what it actually means? There is a moment buried inside the 10th chapter of Daniel that should have permanently restructured the way every serious reader of Scripture understands the invisible war operating above their heads right now. It did not happen in a dream. It did not happen in a symbol-laden vision requiring centuries of interpretive debate. It happened in real time, while a man was fasting, while his face was toward Jerusalem and his knees were on the ground, and he had absolutely no idea that a war had erupted in the heavens, directly above him, the moment the first word of his prayer left his lips. Today we are going to investigate that war. We are going to examine who fought it, who was blocking it, what was at stake, and what the full biblical record reveals about the architecture of the invisible conflict that is still operating right now above every person watching this. This is not a surface reading. This is a cold case with 4 threads of evidence. And by the time the final thread lands, the way you understand unanswered prayer will never be the same. Daniel, chapter 10. The year is approximately 536 BC. The Babylonian Empire has collapsed. Cyrus the Great of Persia now controls the known world. The Jewish exiles have received a formal royal decree permitting them to return to Jerusalem. The road home is legally open. The captivity is technically over, and Daniel is fasting, not celebrating, not organizing the return caravan, not drafting letters to the returning community. Fasting. 3 full weeks of intense, deliberate mourning and intercession. No choice food, no meat, no wine, no anointing oil. The text in Daniel 10 verses 2 and 3 describes the discipline with a precision that signals this was not casual spiritual routine. This was a man in sustained, deliberate, costly intercession over something that was deeply wrong, despite the fact that the circumstances looked resolved on the surface. Because Daniel understood something that the celebrating exiles did not yet fully grasp. The decree of Cyrus was a door, but the land they were returning to was rubble. The temple was ash and stone. The walls of Jerusalem were broken. The surrounding nations were hostile. The spiritual condition of the returning community was fragile. The external permission to go home and the internal capacity to rebuild what had been destroyed were not the same thing. Daniel was not praying about the decree. He was praying about what the decree would encounter when it made contact with reality. On the 24th day of the first month, Daniel is standing on the bank of the great river Tigris when the atmosphere above him tears open. What he sees does not match the soft, luminous figures that populate most artistic representations of angelic encounters. The description in Daniel 10 verses 5 and 6 is staggering in its physical intensity. A man dressed in linen with a belt of pure gold from Uphaz around his waist, his body like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs gleaming like burnished bronze, his voice like the roar of a multitude. The men standing with Daniel do not see the figure, but they feel something. The text says they are seized with such overwhelming terror that they flee and hide themselves without knowing what they are running from. Their bodies registered the presence of something that their eyes could not process. Daniel alone remains standing, and what happens next strips him of every physical resource he possesses. His face turns deathly pale. His strength drains from his body completely. He falls forward into a deep sleep, face down on the ground. When a hand touches him, he rises to his hands and knees, trembling. When he finally stands upright, the being speaks, and even the sound of the words causes Daniel to drop his gaze to the ground, unable to lift his face. What Daniel encountered on the bank of the Tigris was not a gentle heavenly courier delivering a routine message. It was a being whose unveiled presence alone was sufficient to collapse a man who had survived Babylonian captivity, a den of lions, decades of proximity to the most powerful and volatile rulers in the ancient world, and 30 years of sustained prophetic ministry in a foreign empire that had every reason to destroy him. This being, of that magnitude, with that kind of unveiled glory, had been delayed. That word needs to stop you completely. The angel speaks to Daniel in verses 12 and 13 and delivers a statement that permanently alters the cosmology of everyone who reads it carefully, enough to feel its full weight. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard. I have come in response to them. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. Daniel had been fasting and praying for exactly 21 days. The mathematics of that alignment is not incidental. From the moment Daniel's first prayer left his lips, a response was dispatched from heaven. And for every single day that Daniel was face down on the ground, an invisible war was actively preventing that response from landing. The angel was not late because God was slow. The angel was not delayed because the prayer was insufficient. The angel was not held back while God deliberated over whether the request merited a response. The angel was blocked, physically, actively, strategically blocked for 3 weeks by a being the text identifies as the Prince of the Kingdom of Persia. This raises the first investigative thread of this case. Who is the Prince of Persia? Why was he powerful enough to hold a heaven-dispatched angel at a standstill for 21 days? And what does his existence reveal about the invisible architecture operating above the nations right now? The answer requires us to examine a dimension of biblical cosmology that most modern readers have either never been taught or have been unconsciously trained to skip past. The term prince in Daniel 10 is not referring to a human political figure. Cyrus of Persia was the human king. His administrators and military commanders were the human government. The Prince of Persia operating in the heavenly confrontation, described in Daniel 10, is a being of an entirely different category. The Hebrew word used is sar, a commander, a chief, a ruling authority. And the context makes unmistakably clear that this is a non-human spiritual entity with genuine territorial jurisdiction over the empire of Persia. This is not a concept invented in Daniel. It is a principle embedded in the oldest layers of the Old Testament and confirmed across the full sweep of the biblical canon. Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. In the reading preserved in the Septuagint and confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls, records that when the Most High divided the nations and set the boundaries of the peoples, he established those boundaries according to the number of the sons of God. Each nation was assigned a spiritual overseer. Each territory had an authority structure operating in the heavenly realm above its human government. The nations were not simply political entities with borders drawn on maps. They were jurisdictions in a cosmic administration with assigned rulers operating in a dimension that human eyes could not see and human armies could not reach. Isaiah confirms the same architecture when he addresses the king of Babylon in Isaiah 14, in terms that simultaneously speak to a human ruler and the spiritual power operating above him. Ezekiel 28 performs the identical move with the prince of Tyre, beginning with the human ruler and escalating into a description of a being whose origin predates human history entirely. Paul maps this architecture in Ephesians 6:12 with the precision of a field commander briefing his troops. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. The Greek words Paul chooses are not interchangeable. Rulers archon is the same word used in the Septuagint for the territorial commanders of Daniel 1:2. Authorities exousia describes delegated governing power. Powers of this dark world cosmocrator is a title used in ancient literature for world-dominating rulers. Paul is not generating metaphors for human institutions. He is describing a ranked hierarchy of spiritual entities, with specific assignments, specific territories, and specific strategic objectives operating in the heavenly realms above the human world. And the one assigned to Persia had enough embedded power and jurisdictional authority to hold a heaven-dispatched angel of overwhelming glory at a military standstill for 21 consecutive days. Consider the scale of what that means. The being who appeared to Daniel was powerful enough to strip a seasoned prophet of all physical strength by his unveiled presence alone. And that being, operating with a direct divine commission and the full authority of a heaven-sent mission, was successfully resisted for 3 weeks by a territorial power that had embedded itself in the spiritual architecture above the most dominant empire on earth. This was not a brief skirmish. This was a sustained siege, conducted by a strategic power that understood exactly what it was preventing and exactly how long it needed to hold the line to break the man below. Now we must examine the second entity named in this confrontation, because the text does not leave us with the Prince of Persia as the only figure requiring investigation. It gives us something far more specific and far more significant. Daniel 10 verse 13. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Michael. This is the same Michael identified in Jude 1 verse 1. 9, as the archangel who disputed with Satan over the body of Moses and refused to bring a slanderous accusation against him, saying only, "The Lord rebuke you," the same Michael named in Daniel 12:1, as the great prince who protects your people, who will arise during the time of unprecedented distress at the end of the age. The same Michael who appears in Revelation 12:7, commanding the armies of heaven in direct warfare against the dragon and his angels. His name in Hebrew, Mikael, is not simply a name. It is a question posed as a declaration. Who is like God? It is a standing challenge issued into the cosmos every time it is spoken. An assertion of divine incomparability, encoded into the identity of the highest-ranking warrior in the biblical angelic hierarchy. And the text in Daniel 10 describes him not as a subordinate messenger or a supporting courier, but as one of the chief princes, a commander, dispatched specifically to break a siege that the angel sent to Daniel had been unable to break alone for 21 days. The confrontation above Persia required Michael. Let that land with its full weight. The territorial power embedded in the heavens above the Persian Empire was significant enough, entrenched enough, and strategically positioned enough that the resolution of the conflict demanded the personal intervention of the highest-ranking warrior angel in the biblical record. This was not routine resistance. This was a fortified stronghold with enough jurisdictional authority to block heaven's communications to a praying man across 3 full weeks. And it raises the question that should unsettle every reader who has ever spent days, weeks, or months in prayer without a visible response. What if the silence is not absence? What if the silence is a war? Before we follow that question to its conclusion, we need to track the third investigative thread. Because Daniel 10 does not operate in isolation. It connects to a pattern that runs across the full span of the biblical record, with a consistency that cannot be explained away as coincidence. Return to the book of Job, chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. There is a day when the sons of God present themselves before the Lord, and Satan comes among them. The Lord asks Satan where he has come from, and Satan's answer is chilling in its casual confidence. From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it, Satan, in Job 1, is not a prisoner. He is not confined. He is not operating from a position of limitation or restraint. He is mobile. He is strategic. He is conducting surveillance. And the scene that follows reveals something that scholars across centuries have noted with careful discomfort. Satan has access to the divine council. He appears before God. He brings formal accusations. He argues jurisdiction. He proposes a test with specific parameters and receives permission to implement it. This is not a scene of defeated opposition. This is a scene of a legal adversary operating within a framework of cosmic jurisprudence that grants him genuine standing and genuine access. The same figure Paul describes in 2 Corinthians 4:4 as the God of this age. The same figure Jesus calls the ruler of this world in John 12:31, acknowledging his operational authority over the present age, while simultaneously declaring that authority to be temporary and already defeated in principle. The same figure Revelation 12:10 describes as the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night. Day and night. The accusation does not stop. The legal challenge does not pause. The adversarial pressure on heaven's communication channels does not take holidays. The Prince of Persia in Daniel 10 is not an independent contractor operating on his own initiative. He is embedded in a network, a hierarchy of territorial authorities, operating under a single strategic intelligence, whose objective across every century of the biblical record is identical: obstruction, delay, suppression, corruption, and where possible, the complete prevention of divine communication reaching the people positioned to act on it. He did not need to destroy Daniel's prayer. The prayer had already been heard. He did not need to cancel the answer. The answer was already dispatched. He only needed to prevent the answer from arriving long enough to break the man below into silence. If Daniel had stopped praying on day 14, or day 17, or day 20, the answer that was already in transit would have arrived to find no one still listening. The delay was the weapon, not the defeat. The delay was the entire strategy. The fourth thread is the one that reframes everything we have examined, and it requires us to return to Daniel 10 verse 12 with the full precision the text demands. Your words were heard from the first day, not from the 21st day, not after Daniel had demonstrated sufficient persistence to warrant a divine response, not after a threshold of spiritual discipline had been crossed. From the first day, the moment the prayer was spoken, it was heard. The moment it was heard, a response was dispatched. The hearing and the sending and the praying were simultaneous events. Only the arrival was warred against. This distinction is not minor. It is the entire architecture of intercession in the biblical cosmos. God's response to Daniel was not withheld pending sufficient prayer. It was not held in reserve while heaven assessed the quality of the petitioner. It was not delayed by divine hesitation or strategic silence designed to build Daniel's character. It was warred against by a territorial power that understood with strategic precision what that message contained and what would happen if it reached its destination. There is a cosmic difference between a God who delays and a war that delays. The text does not describe a God who was waiting to see if Daniel was serious enough. It describes a God who dispatched his answer within hours of the first prayer, and an enemy who spent 21 days trying to intercept it. And the man through whom this confrontation is recorded is not a novice believer discovering prayer for the first time. This is Daniel, the man whose reputation for prayer was so well established, so publicly known, so personally threatening to the political powers of Babylon, that his enemies used it as the legal instrument to have him condemned to the lion's den. They did not fabricate a charge against him. They simply waited for him to pray and then pointed at the law. His prayer life was so consistent, so visible, so utterly non-negotiable that it functioned as his only political vulnerability. This man, with this track record, with this depth of established relationship with God, had his answered prayer held in a war zone for 21 consecutive days. If it happened to Daniel, it is not an anomaly reserved for seasons of exceptional testing. It is the operational architecture of intercession in a cosmos where territorial powers have genuine jurisdiction and genuine capacity to obstruct divine communication. Now consider the full strategic picture of what the Prince of Persia was protecting. The angel in Daniel 10 does not simply deliver a private word of encouragement and return to heaven. What he delivers across Daniel chapters 11 and 12 is among the most detailed and precise prophetic material in the entire Old Testament canon. The sequential rise and fall of the Persian Empire, the emergence of Greece, the campaigns of Alexander, the fracturing of his kingdom among 4 generals, the wars between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, the rise of Antiochus Epiphanes and his desecration of the Jerusalem temple, the abomination of desolation, the time of unprecedented tribulation at the end of the age, the resurrection of the dead, the final judgment. This was not a personal message for one man in Persia. This was the prophetic blueprint for the entire sweep of human history, from the Persian period to the end of the age. The strategic intelligence that would allow God's people across every subsequent generation to understand the shape of what was coming, to recognize the signs, to hold their faith against the weight of events that would otherwise appear to be the final defeat of everything God had promised. The territorial power above Persia did not spend 21 days trying to discourage one elderly Jewish statesman. It spent 21 days trying to suppress a revelation that would reorient the faith of millions of people across 35 centuries of subsequent human history. The enemy knew what was written in that scroll. He understood its contents. He grasped with full spiritual clarity what those prophecies would mean for the people of God if they received them, understood them, and held them across the centuries of darkness that were coming. And he committed 21 days of sustained military resistance to making sure that scroll never reached its destination. Michael broke the siege. The scroll arrived. And the revelation that a territorial power fought for 3 weeks to suppress became the prophetic cornerstone of the biblical end times record, studied, debated, and discovered by scholars and believers from 536 BC to this present day. The strategy of the accuser has not changed in 3,000 years. He does not always move through obvious destruction. He does not always announce himself with catastrophic disruption. He does not always come as a raging adversary seeking immediate devastation. Sometimes his most effective and most patient instrument is sustained delay in the space between the prayer and the answer. The unanswered prayer that stretches from day 7 to day 14 to day 21, until the person on their knees draws the only conclusion that the silence seems to support, that heaven is not listening, that the request did not merit a response, that the silence means no. This is not a theological abstraction for someone watching this right now. You have been praying about something for longer than feels spiritually reasonable. The answer has not arrived. The situation has not shifted. The door has not opened. The relationship has not been restored. The healing has not come. The provision has not landed. And the enemy's most precise strategy in this exact season is not to attack your faith with obvious external pressure. It is to use the silence itself as the weapon, to stretch the gap between the prayer and the arrival long enough that you conclude the prayer was not heard and you stop. Daniel's 21 days are a permanent rebuttal inscribed into the biblical record against that conclusion. Your words were heard from the first day, not a promise extracted from context, not a motivational sentiment borrowed from the surface of the text. The operational testimony of the biblical record, demonstrated through the lived experience of the most committed intercessor in the Old Testament, confirmed by an angel who fought through a heavenly war zone to deliver the evidence in person. The delay above you is not divine disinterest. It may be the most intense spiritual warfare of your entire life, happening in a realm you cannot see, fought over an answer that has already been dispatched, protecting a revelation the enemy is desperate to prevent from reaching you, because he understands better than you do what you will do when it arrives. The grave of Moses was hidden so Satan could not construct an idol from a dead season and use Israel's own grief to replace the God who buried him. The answer to Daniel was warred against for 21 days to test whether sustained silence could collapse a prophet's knees before the breakthrough came. Both times, the strategy of the accuser failed, not because the man was exceptional enough, not because the prayer was perfect enough, because the God who dispatched the answer was sovereign over the war that tried to stop it. Michael came. The siege broke. The message landed. The revelation that a territorial power spent 3 weeks trying to suppress became the prophetic foundation that billions of people across 35 centuries of human history have built their hope upon. Do not stop on day 20. The accuser can delay the messenger. He cannot cancel the message. He can obstruct the corridor between heaven and earth. He cannot override the source. He can embed his authorities in the spaces between the prayer and the answer and wage a war that the person praying cannot see and cannot feel and cannot measure. But he cannot change what was heard on the first day. He cannot reassign what was dispatched in response. He cannot hold the line against Michael forever. If this investigation has changed the way you see the war operating above your life right now, share it with someone who needs to understand why heaven's silence is not heaven's absence. Subscribe into Bible Heroes TV. God bless you.